thanks for tuning in to Power Athlete Radio. Defense tactics consists of so much more than reaction time and training. Take a look into the mind of guest Tony Blauer to find out just how big a factor fear plays in our everyday life. This fascinating conversation with the founder of Blauer Tactical Systems truly enlightens the crew with amazing anecdotes and mental toughness diagnostics. The more you know about your own perceptions and biases, the easier you can predict your susceptibility to the unknown. Furthermore, knowing your own fear and facing it head-on will expose your weaknesses, allowing you to train to address them. The conversation inevitably turns towards the recent election. Recorded just days after the results, the crew and Blauer sit back and pontificate on the hows and whys of the interesting turn of events. Tony discusses how we can be hyper-aware of our own fear with regard to politics and media, and hopefully conquer it. Equipping yourself with a winning mindset and the ability to manage fear will allow you to exceed your own expectations. This is just one of the takeaways from this week's surprisingly philosophical and not so surprisingly deadly guest, Tony Blauer. This is episode 183.
Our Athlete Nation, what's up? Is that still cool?
No, it's not. That's played.
All right, well,
for 7 years, haven't you?
Yeah, dude, every 2 days you got to bring it up.
Let me tell you, Luke beats a dead horse.
That is what I do. That is my
here at Power
specialty.
Athlete.
This is Luke. I'm here with John, Texas in Texas.
Feels great.
You are listening to Power Athlete Radio, the premier podcast in strength and conditioning. Let's just jump right into it. Listen, people, we've got Tony Blauer on today. He is the man behind Blauer Tactical Systems. Hopefully, listen, there's just been a lot of things going on.
Well,
hang on, John.
okay.
Let me go. There's been a lot of things going on here with the election and politics, and we're going to do our best to stay out of that trench because odds are it's going to be 2 weeks behind before this airs.
Well, this is really our post-election podcast, so
Sure.
I think we should
Now,
jump this one up to maybe this afternoon.
We'll see what we can do. But here's the cool thing about it is like this. As we were talking before the show, Tony is like, this for a lot of people, this whole process has incited like fear, and people don't know how to respond to that. And I think we're going to kind of have a deep dive into that today. And even more interesting is Tony's from America Junior, Canada.
You mean Little America?
Where everybody's allegedly thinks it's as easy as fucking taking a step across the border and becoming a citizen. Tony, I think, can even speak to the process of becoming a citizen in the States relative to probably becoming a citizen in Canada and vice versa. I mean, that's what's crazy about this is people I don't think understand the visa process and the citizenship process as well. But we're going to try and stay out of that, stick to fear, but fucking who knows? This is going to be a post-election talk. So strap yourself in, people.
Yeah, I mean, I was stoked to actually have Tony on because probably nobody on the earth knows more about fear and has really coached and worked in that environment more than Tony. So to actually get in there and start looking at the psyche and really what drove the American voter in the direction of really what we're seeing today, where people are taking to the streets and triggering and having these panic attacks, and people are I believe just being overly dramatic just to be dramatic so that they can bring attention. And then our other favorite is Luke tried to pull that our work environment is a stressful environment. He's going through post-election stress syndrome, and he wanted to take the day off, at which point I ixnayed it.
No, dude, I'm telling you, Good Morning America said it's real. They said that the treatment is to go to a movie, a matinee, and have some popcorn and Reese's.
Ooh. No, let's do a podcast and work on our
Let's
books.
do it.
But it's the one that blew me away was we were watching CNN last night at the airport coming back from Salt Lake City, and the guy on CNN van was literally practically on the verge of tears, talking about what was he going to tell his children? How could he go home and tell his daughter? And went through this whole deal. And I'm thinking to myself, I got up with my kids today. You know what we did? We had breakfast and we colored. And then we talked, and you're going to love this, at their school they have something called their peace tents. So when they need time to like relax or be peaceful, they have like a little tent that they can go in and play in. And so my daughters were telling me about their peace corners and peace tents. And I asked them, I'm like, do you go there very often? And they're like, no, just the boy that gets in trouble all the time has to go to the peace tent. I'm thinking to myself, this is the world we live in, that 5-year-olds have to go to school with like peace corners and peace tents.
Well, before we get into like the social strategies and shit that's going to be really interesting that shakes out here, Tony, what is up? Thanks. I'm glad we finally connected. How are you doing, man?
I'm good, man. I'm on a 17-hour time change. I just got back from teaching in the Orient. I was there for almost 2 weeks, so totally got into their time zone. Got back a couple of days ago, so it's night. I'm going to have dinner soon and go to bed, probably in the middle of the broadcast.
Well, Tony, hey man, if people are listening, don't know who you are, give them the intro, man. What are you about, and what do they need to know about you before we get started?
Wow. I don't even know where to start on that. I would say John kind of hit some stuff that, my focus has been for most of my life, trying to understand fear. As a kid, I felt like I had more fear than anybody should. As an athlete, I was afraid of winning. I was afraid to let down my parents. I was afraid of, growing up in the 60s, it wasn't anything you talked about. And I remember, talk about this at my seminars. I was a very competitive skier. And so, from coming from Canada, you're either a hockey player or a skier. And my family was into skiing. And, by the time I was 13, people thought I was going to maybe represent Canada at the Olympics. And I remember being at this race. I was like 14, 15 years old, top of the hill, above the ski line, freezing. I'd already pissed like 5 times. I wanted to projectile vomit. I was so nervous. I'm coming up in a couple of minutes. My coach is rubbing my knees and reminding me about what to watch out, which gates, which ice, and over here. And he looks at me. He goes, "How do you feel, kid?" And I looked in his eyes, like I was sweating and it was freezing up there, butterflies in my stomach. And I looked in his eyes and I went, "I'm great, coach." Right. And I took off, down the hill about 3 gates from the bottom. I caught a tip going too hard, wiped out so hard that I actually fell through the finish line on a giant slalom race. And someone comes up to me a little while later and says, "Too bad you lost. Or too bad you wiped out there because, you were 1 second ahead of the guy that ultimately won the race," where they were timing stuff. And 1 second in giant slalom ski race, like a mile in a car race. And I tell this story because when I'm talking about fear and mindset and psychology to people, I go, what if my coach had said to me, "Hang on a second, man." I said, what if my coach had pulled me aside 50 minutes earlier and said, "Hey, how do you feel, kid?" And I looked in his eyes and I lied to him, right? And I said, "Great, coach." I said, what if he pulled me aside, put his arm around me and said, "Hey, I've been coaching you for 3-4 years. And have you noticed that you've never won a race? You're great in practice, but you've never won a race. What's going on?" I probably would have looked at him, maybe started crying and said, "If I'm so good, why am I so scared?" Now, as a kid back then, and there was no performance psychology. There were no, even most of the stuff today, I think, is lame. You guys can appreciate this. I'm going to write a book one day. I got the working title right now. It's called "Cheering is Not Coaching." Most coaches don't know how to get in their athlete's head. They're fucking like, just go, "Come on, you can do it." And the guys are dying, like going, "No, I can't, coach. You come in here. Can we tag team?" Like, it's, cheering isn't coaching. And most people don't understand the psychology of fear. We talk about the biology of fear and the physiology of fear all the time, fight or flight and all that shit. And I go, none of that matters. All that matters is how you self-coach, what you're actually saying to yourself. So that was believe it or not, that whole story kind of like speaks to my path as a 7-year-old, leading up to me developing probably the world's only behaviorally based self-defense system, where literally, I look at stuff and I go, people think they need to get a black belt or study a martial art to learn how to defend themselves. And they misconstrue what I consider the categories that martial arts, combat sports, and reality-based self-defense is not the same as studying and understanding violent encounters. So we put together a program called Be Your Own Bodyguard. And it's all based on the startle flinch research that I started doing back in the late 80s. And so, our main client is law enforcement, military. We've been training them for decades now. And we do a lot of stuff. We developed a program for CrossFit athletes. We've done stuff for MMA. We've done stuff for law enforcement, military. And we've touched every single kind of community that actually has to put their hands on either an opponent or a bad guy. But the central theme to every course is understanding the psychology and the physiology of fear, how your body moves under high stress, and then what you got to do, what you got to do with that. But so that's kind of in a nutshell. That's what I've been doing for 36 years. I had the dream when I was like a teenager. My mom said, "What are you going to do, kid, when you're older? Like, you want to be a lawyer, you want to be a doctor," that cliche 1970s talk. And I looked at her, and I think I was stretching, looking at Bruce Lee magazine. I said, oh, Mom, I'm going to be a martial artist like Bruce Lee. I'm going to have my own fighting system. And she pat me on the head and said, "Okay, dear, we'll talk about this when you're older." But true story. And so here we are, like, 40, literally over 40 years later. And that's what I do. I literally spend every day trying to figure out how to make good humans safer.
Damn.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting because we were just with some guys, kind of special forces guys yesterday, and their level of combat readiness is certainly different. Required level is certainly different than a guy like me who's never going to be over there. But I certainly could fucking walking down the street, back alley, taking a shortcut, 6 beers in, and some guy wants to jump me. I got to be able to respond to that, right? And it's just like, these are real threats, and I think people take it for granted because we're in a safe place, man. Like, most of us. I'm not going to say globally. I'm not going to say like everyone in the States is like, there are bad parts of town, but I think you just take for granted that there are bad people ready to do bad things, even in the fucking sanctity of the home.
Hey, John, can I jump in real quick? I just want to say something here about that. Listen, we have a maxim we're using, like a slogan. We say, "In your fight, your point," right? And it's not who's right, it's who's left in a fight. So it's not about, it's like provocative things to think about. I would argue that you're in, like when people say, "Oh, those guys, they got to go downrange, they got to do that." When is the last time, we talk about like a SWAT team was beaten up or mugged, right? And so it's context. It's always perception and context. As a citizen, you're in more danger because when something happens to you, it's a true ambush. Our focus is totally about the ambush, and so at the moment that a cop or special operations guy or you or me or John is ambushed, this is why the research is powerful, because what it talks to and triggers right away is the limbic system, the amygdala, the whole reptilian brain fires off. And that is why, like my biggest client is military and law enforcement, not ironically who needs it more, which is like, you and me and just like a citizen in ATM or getting out of their car, because we live in our theoretical bubble thinking it won't happen. If I said, hey, one of us is going to get, attacked later today, everyone on this call is going to look over their shoulder and go, "I wonder if it's going to be Tex. I wonder if it's going to be John. I wonder if it's going to be Tony." Right? We never think.
Or some people
I
fucking hope it's me.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Which I'd be like, "Oh, please just let me fucking do something." I'm like, God, I haven't hit anybody in anger in so many years.
Dude, it's funny. We'll be driving around, and I consider John under the aggressive driver category, and like a level that above me, which I would consider myself aggressive. And whenever something happens, it's like, "I hope this fucking guy gets out of the car. I hope he gets out of the car. Oh, there he goes. What a pussy."
Well, I really don't want him to get out of the car because if I know that something happens, I'm going to have to give him money, which I don't want to do, or lose my freedom. But I also
kids can dream, John.
But I'm also really good at stressful situations like that and sensing other people's stress, and then taking that stress and actually turning it back and then making them question what they're doing is really the right thing they should be doing. And like I've been in like numerous kind of weird encounters like that where I've been like, "Are you sure you want to be doing this? Like let's take a step back. Let's role play this. How do you expect this is going to go for you?" And like when for the most part, I think, and Tony, you know this. I mean, when you get into some form of confrontation, most people, energy goes through the roof. Voice goes up. All of a sudden, people get this defensive posture, and they start doing the peacock and like all these different things. And then when they run into people that have like a strange sense of calmness, right? It's extremely like unnerving, and like they don't know how to react. They're like, "Well, wait, I'm all wound up. Why aren't you wound up?" It's kind of, it's like we were, like Luke was saying, we were with these guys, and one of the guys that we were rapping with, his ears were literally like mangled. Yeah, like so trashed. And I made a joke. I'm like, the only people I really would ever, like in any type of deal, I see a guy instantly, like I could see you printing with a gun, and I probably wouldn't be as tactically or have as much tact as if I see a dude whose ears are so mangled, like so puffed out, obviously an MMA or wrestler or something, where I see those ears, that might be the single best defense, at least for people that know what they're looking for. You see a dude with those ears because you earn those. Like, you just don't get those things.
Right. I actually years ago, I and the UFC ended up doing this years ago. I'd make a joke. I try to make people laugh at our seminars, and I said, listen, I got a de-escalation starter kit. It's a tap out shirt and these snap-on cauliflower ears. You go into a bar in a strange town, you pop your ears on into the car and get your shirt on. You walk into the bar and people are like, "Oh, let's buy him a beer."
But I mean, like that's the one thing I think. What I always really dug about your system, and I have fucking apologized so many times that every time I always see anything, I'm always like, "Fuck, we got to go to this thing." And what I always really enjoyed, especially doing my job for playing in the NFL, was a big thing was about assessing people really quickly. So you break out of the huddle, you run to the line, and instantly you start doing like the ocular pat down, as I would call it, where like, okay, like what's this guy doing? Does he look tired? Is he big? You start
where's
trying
the weight? What's going on behind him?
Yeah, I mean, I've already done a scouting report. I know this. Like, I have to be able to assess how much he wants it on this play, what I need to do, and you start kind of game planning and setting up this kind of like mental chess war that's going to turn into a physical one really quickly. But I found when I went out in society and was away from there, you still do the same thing. You instantly walk up and see people, you see how it is. And we've been in numerous situations or stressful situations, whether it's driving or you meet people and people act like that, and you almost disarm me. Like, so what are we doing here? Like, like slowly rolling. Like, people are so quick to puff up their chest that I think you can almost disarm them either with a joke or a little bit of humor or just not being nervous. And when people see that you're not nervous, instantly they become scared, and that's almost the best form of fear.
Yeah, well, we have a maxim. So, we've broken down our approach to confrontation management in three steps: D1, D2, D3. D1 is detect and avoid. D2 is defuse and de-escalate. And D3 is if push comes to shove, defend yourself. And in the D2 category, we've got a maxim that those who talk can usually be persuaded to walk. And so if you've got the psychological wherewithal, and certainly you must get into a lot of confrontations with people who are really nearsighted or blind, because you're so fucking big. I can't even imagine, but I've heard that before, like just fucking, drunk idiots or just the Napoleon complex guy.
I'll just give you a little insight. When I was in high school, I was about, I know this sounds kind of funny when I tell it, but I was like 6'4", probably about 245 pounds.
Right.
I was like 16, 17 years old, which I'd go out and people were super confrontational with me. Like, I almost every time we either go somewhere, like somebody was always fucking confrontational. And then as I got to college and started getting bigger, and all of a sudden I was like 275, 280, it slowed down. And then as soon as I crossed that 300-pound barrier, it literally stopped. And and then it would be, something weird, like, somebody cuts you off and a guy gives you a finger and you pull up and you wave and they want to get out of the car, and then you get out of the car, then they get back in the car and drive away. And I'm like, it's funny. I mean, over the years, and especially as an NFL player, people are looking at it like, oh, if this guy hits me, I'm going to sue him, and there's going to be some backlash. I was a huge believer in being like, we can disarm most of this stuff with just a little bit of intelligence, a little bit of, just body position, and just a little bit of just being like, hey, man, like, let's slow this down a little bit. Like, this isn't the best way to proceed. And now talk into that.
What's interesting, so, one of the things that I guess your listeners, anyone who's just like listening and trying to like learn some stuff from this, is at the end of the day, you're not going to be bigger than you are the day that you fight. And so, a lot of people are worried about their potential instead of their capacity. And you got to learn what you can do, whether you're a small person or a big person. John, you could have, with the same 300-pound frame, your stories could have been, why do I always get beaten up? There's a part of your emotional, psychological development that, made it congruent with the rules of D2, the de-escalation, that while your size helps, it's certainly a deterrent. The fact is, you were very cerebral, and through stress inoculation, through just growing up, your confrontations in football, and you're a smart guy, it put you in a place where, and this is the maxim that I love is, the expression, the pen is mightier than the sword.
Sure.
So I added a little part to that. I went, the pen is mightier than the sword when you know how to use a sword, meaning you knew what was going to happen if this went physical. Whether
I've always been a student of violence, and we were talking about this the other day. I mean, I boxed and fought from the time I was 6 years old, and so being able to throw hands and being able to defend myself, and it was one of those things where even as a youngster, I was a good fighter, and then you get to the NFL and you get a chance to fight against guys of your own size, and also realize that that your ability to inflict pain on people, is greater than others, and you become skilled at the art of combat and violence. And I think when you know that, then all of a sudden you get into a situation and you're like, this really isn't going to go well for you. And more importantly, we don't want this to go to this place because, one, I don't want it to, and neither do you. So let's just diffuse this a little bit and walk away, and everybody will be happy, and then we won't have to fucking hurt anybody.
Right. And something in your upbringing or how your parents raised you or just something allowed you to develop a D2 skill set. And I think that's what's really missing in the world today. Certainly in a lot of the martial arts and self-defense communities, everything's the hammer. Everything is the D3. Everything's how to get out of a choke, how to do a gun disarm, how to do, how to fight. So everything starts in the fighting area. And so people aren't developing. And plus we're in this entitled, crucified generation where everyone needs that safe space and everyone gets hurt and everyone's ready to sue. And, that there's almost no real situational awareness, possibly a lot just because everyone's on their phone. But
you know what, you made that comment and I can't remember where you made it. It was either in a video or I can't remember if it was in person, but you were like, the majority of people are walking through life like this, and this is all they focus on. And and as soon as you said it, I remember I was at an ATM and this lady was on her phone at the ATM, zero situational awareness. I could have gone up and literally taken everything out of this lady's, purse and whatnot. And I started even noticing how many people are literally walking on their phones to the point where, I was at the bank and I'm going across the street and this lady literally goes to step off and I reached and held her from falling off because she's on her phone as a car went by. And then she looks at me all offended. I was like, you almost got killed. And then I was told her, did you see the car? And she was like, oh, what? I'm like, dude, you're walking.
Yeah, for a moment, you're a sexual predator.
Yeah. And then instantly, oh, thank you for saving my life because I'm too busy. And I think you made that point. And I had just never even seen it until you brought it up. But it became something that I just hyper aware, just started watching. And to the point where I even talked to my wife, I was like, you almost have to be in the moment everywhere you are. I mean, everybody's so distracted in so many different ways, and almost, somewhere something else is more important. So I don't live in the moment. And I think that's just more, obviously situational awareness, but that's just more a metaphor for everything else that's going on.
It's like riding a motorcycle, right? Trust no one who's fucking driving. And now that with everybody with cell phones, it's even outside of the vehicle. It's fucking.
That's part of the thing is almost everybody texts and drive because they think they can, it's this adaptation in the way and this is all part of psychology. We think we're okay. We think someone else is going to make the mistake and not us. And a lot of it is I break down situational awareness on two levels. Most people think of situational awareness as external, that ocular thing that you mentioned, John, where you're looking outside. But I really believe, and this might be a little deep, but situational starts internally. What are your unconscious biases, and how do you talk about an unconscious bias if it's unconscious? And what are your prejudices, and so if you start with situational awareness saying, I'm okay to drive drunk, I'm okay to text and drive because I'm good at multitasking, then that's a prejudice bias that you have that changes actually your external situational awareness. And so, the stuff that I certainly am really passionate about is getting is provoking people to really think about shit, right? Careful what you practice, you might get really good at the wrong shit. And it's an interesting time, like we were talking about earlier, just how butthurt people are, and we go back to, like, you studying violence, John. I mean, we're not allowed to use the word violence anymore. I don't think. They're just bad guys can't be called bad guys. I think they're clients now in jail. It's our clients or something. I'm joking, but they're changing. Everything is so PC. But I really believe if somehow we could teach kids more about instincts and intuition, managing fear, and learning how to defend themselves, and what's the difference between offense and self-protection, that we would change the trajectory that the world's headed on. Just people need to be, you grew up at a time. I grew up at a time where I mean, I look at some of the shit out there and I'm going, are you kidding? I don't even know what to say to this. Like, I don't even, it's just people need to know how to fight, not for paranoid reasons, although this is a great era to also look at the world and go, this would be a good time to learn to know how to protect yourself. I'm always telling people, the ability to protect yourself as a loved one is probably the single most important skill you could possess. That every goal that you have and every material possession you have, you give up in a second. If you're of sound mind and body, if I said, hey, here's what's going to happen. You get to keep your guitar collection, your watch collection, your cars, your bank account. But the people most important to you are going to be, destroyed tomorrow by violence. Like, I think you would go, fuck that shit. I want my family, or I want myself, wherever you're at. Right.
Well, the other one I think people really benefit from is just being punched in the face at least once. At some point needs to be punched in the face and feel that, either taste of their own blood, that, like, that feeling of being punched in the nose where you're like, I think I'm going to, throw up or hit in the solar plexus, wind knocked out of you or anything. Just that, I don't know how I'm going to react until it happens. You can game play, role play and all that. And I remember I was pretty young. I think I was like 6 years old, and my older brother had gotten into a fight, and I guess he got his ass kicked or something. And my dad, not being a fighter, was like, well, let's take him to karate, right? The Karate Kid deal. So he takes my brother into martial arts, and takes him to the Shotokan place. And after about 2 weeks, my brother starts beating up on my brother and I. So what does my dad do? He just takes us all there. And was like, well, he's going to beat up on you, let's take everybody. So I'm 6 years old, and I'm in this Shotokan deal. And it was, Okadas and forearms and, like, super technical Japanese stuff. I mean, the dude was so old school Japanese, like the bamboo bow staff that, you could sit and kneel, and if you moved, he would whack you on the shoulder. I mean, like, dude, the guy was seriously old school Japanese. And I mean, there was this physical abuse where if you made a mistake, there was a physical repercussion for your mistake. Like, if you were, lazy and your thumb was out, going to pull your thumb back. I mean, it was just how they did it. Like, you put your arm out, and the dude would whack your arm if it wasn't tight. Right. And I really liked it. But I remember in that situation, the first time I got sucked in the face pretty hard, and thinking, like, this wasn't so bad. You're like, oh, all right. And then, you get back up and you do it again. And I actually ended up doing that until I thought kicking was stupid. And then I got into boxing. Right. And then you get into a point where you go to box, and then you get hit so many times that all of a sudden you start developing this weird calm before the storm, where you get into a situation, you're going to get hit, you're going to hit other people. And it becomes this kind of a moot point. You're like, it's part of the acceptance. It's like going and playing football. I knew I was going to hit people. I knew people were going to hit me. I know things were going to get broken, and people were going to be fucked up, and I was going to get fucked up. But you enter into it with almost, at least for me personally, this weird kind of calmness that you're like, yeah, we're going to go fuck these guys up, and then we're going to go get a beer after this. So let's go do our work and get out of here. And I think, like, that's the one thing I think from the years of being a student of violence and being good at it, you just develop this weird kind of calmness. And, like, the one thing which I noticed is the more stressful situations are actually more kind of soothing. And, when there was 100,000 people standing out there and all this, the unis and all these things, that was probably the most quiet and calm it's ever been in my life. It's when things are too quiet and calm that I start to get nervous. And,
It's amazing. And I noticed while you were describing the progression, I had this kind of crazy sick grin on my face, like kind of vicariously reliving and remembering. I mean, when I started teaching, I was this is in the 80s. I set up my first martial arts school, and the sign on my door was functional self-defense, which was very odd title for back in the 80s, because like, why would you write functional self-defense? And it's like this whole reality-based self-defense craze that's been going on. I'm like, what other type of self-defense is there? Like, why do you need to write reality-based defense against unicorns and mermaids? Like it's just,
But you smiled when I said Shotokan. I mean, you know exactly what that style of martial arts is.
Oh yeah.
Like, hey, we're going to build proficiency through like, different technical, closed loop environment skills. And then you're going to do these rehearsed katas. And then somehow you have to be able to take all these skills and then put them into like an open loop where now we're going to spar. And I remember being like, how is me working this kick 1,000 times? I guess the idea is that muscle memory. And then all of a sudden, I just remember like having this hard, transition between like learning one kick, one punch, and then basically putting them into katas and different, which are like, rehearsed movements, and then being able to take that into a sparring platform. And I remember being like, why just don't we spar more?
Right.
Like, why not just learn the movements? So like, that's what kind of like took me. I'm like, I don't want to learn your rehearsed dance. I want you to like, how to throw a good punch, and then I want to go punch somebody.
Well, and what's interesting, you're making me think of a bunch of things. First of all, our whole approach intuitively was what now neuroscience is called brain-based. We, my sign on my door, and it was very provocative at the time, and I had there wasn't a way to monetize your haters back then, but people hated me. People hated me for saying, I would say, hey, this is functional self-defense, and there's no rituals, no uniforms, no nonsense. That was the slogan on our door. No one had to bow. And everything was dynamic, and everything was reverse engineered from scenarios. And we always did scenarios. Starting in 1980, I put together like what was probably the first organized force on force scenarios. And we had hockey gauntlets on, and Taekwondo chest guard, and the Super Seikyu Kushinkai helmets from Japan, and just kicked the shit out of each other. And our stuff, our scenarios were always like, hey, let's have 3 guys jump these 2 guys as they're getting out of a car. Let's film it. Let's analyze it. And we did that over and over. And that was our whole approach. We practiced the mechanics. You talk about open loop, closed loop. I mean, that whole system doesn't work. It doesn't work when you're teaching shooting that way. And I've had so we've got a gunfighting course for military and law enforcement people. And I asked the question, I go, listen, flat range, dial in, understand your weapon, or force on force. If you could only do one for an hour, and then you had to send somebody to go fight, you only had an hour to show them shit, what would you do? Assuming they could load their gun. And it was amazing how many experienced people said, you got to teach them the basics first. You got to teach them the basics first. And I would go, no, if you have an hour to train somebody, get him doing force on force. And it's the way we teach self-defense. Like, we literally, in between 4 and 6 hours, self-defense should be taught like fucking CPR. Like, in 6 hours, I tell people, you can learn a CPR course, and you have the skills to detect and metaphorically diffuse and de-escalate a life-threatening situation. It doesn't make you a fucking doctor after 6 hours. And that's the whole thing. You can learn how to use a fire extinguisher in an hour. It doesn't make you a fireman. You can learn that some basic home defense in an hour with a shotgun. It doesn't make you a SWAT team leader. And this is the big thing, is this reframe for the general public is, and I'm not disputing like, hey, listen, will you be better if you go box and Thai box and do MMA and all that? Yeah, there's stress inoculation in there. And go back to, my brain is racing with things because, going back to you saying everyone should get punched in the face. Yeah. But not everybody. Like, for example, when people would hit me, John, it would always make me smile. When someone would hit me, I'd smile, and I'd be like, I would smile, and I'd be like, hey, that was a good shot, and it would intensify things. I would know this person's serious, but I would never, and now not like. If you did that to everybody, their reaction is going to be different. You had that same reaction, right? It was like, this is good. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, it's go time.
But those are the hunters, and those are the people that have that kind of like that warrior gene, or that and you found a way to be a warrior in football, right? Just, I'm going to go out and battle, and but not everybody has that, but everybody should still get hit and go, see, that sucks. So that means you should keep your mouth shut, because you're not that person. But then there's another part of me, and I mean this altruistically, is that people need to do it so they know that they're more resilient than they thought. And this is important, because you get this cross section of society that thinks, oh, I'll just kick him in the balls, not realizing that that's not physically debilitating. So there's this false assumption that I'm just going to do this palm strike and this person's going to stop fighting, or I'm going to do this front kick. And so the knowledge gain there is more of a psychological reset. It's not about the physical. It's like, okay, I just got punched really hard. I'm okay. I don't want that to happen again. Therefore, I will learn how to avoid violence. In other words, there's this cathartic element. It's not, and somebody might get hit and go, I'd like to do this for a living, and they go on to become, a boxing champion or MMA champ. It can be deep shit. A lot of people look at guys like you and me, I think, and think of us as the warmonger bully, and they just judge us, and that just gets us mad, and then we want to punch them in the throat so they're wrong.
Well, actually, for me, because of that,
joke, people listening.
I've actually tried to sharpen my wit to the point where I'd like to firmly them believe that not only can I tear them down verbally and emotionally and mentally, that I can also fucking stomp them physically. And I'd like to believe that I'll be like, let's just enter a battle of wits at this point. Give me your best. Fucking spar on that occasion. But it's interesting, like, and especially when you think about boys versus girls, this is something, I have twin daughters that are 5 years old, and I think as a parent, you naturally, treat your daughters differently than your sons. And I've actually made a point to not at all actually to try to treat my daughters like they were boys. And so something we talk about is like, you don't want to do that. Like I was trying to tell my daughter today, you need to stop fucking with your sister, because your sister's going to punch you. And then, I told my other daughter, I was like, if she keeps fucking with you, punch. I didn't say fucking with her, but I'm like, if she keeps messing with you, I want you to punch her. And so, like, all of a sudden, 10 minutes later, she punches her. And then my wife is over there trying to talk to him about this. And then she came over, Dad told me this, and then I'm getting in trouble. And I'm like, they have to learn, like, this is how boys learn stuff, right? If you, with your brother, if I'm going to fuck with my brother and he punches me, I'm probably not going to mess with him again. And I'm like, that's the difference. And so, like, our girls, they were doing dance. And then we went to this, like their final rehearsal, like their big deal, and they made them dress up like reindeers last year in these like ridiculous reindeer outfits and do this dancing thing. And as we were leaving, we walked by the Art of Jiu-Jitsu, which is the Mendez brothers here in Newport Beach. Right. And like we walked by and like we stopped and I looked at them and was like, "Do you guys want to do dance?" And they're like, "Not at all. We want to do this." And so like so we'll go, and we've gone to the jiu-jitsu place a couple times because I want them just to see it, like, watch it and actually ask a couple times. I just don't want to drop them off. But I told them, like, you guys just turned 5. You guys are ready. You can go in these classes. And actually, I think that environment with your daughters, putting them in a situation where they are comfortable within stressful situations where they do this. And people ask me, like, well, aren't you worried? I'm like, no, the only thing I'm worried about is, let's say they're 13 and some dude messes with them. I want them to be able to be rat pack some dude and armbar him and snap his arm, or, get out of some stressful situation. Because I'd much rather get that phone call than to be like, oh, your 13-year-old daughter got assaulted, she got raped, something happened. And I think the problem becomes is that as parents, we are not prepping our children for the bad. We, and dude, you know this. I mean, well, actually, maybe you don't because you probably haven't done it. But the majority of parents that I meet want to shield their children from everything. Like they want to, like, oh no, this will all be fine. And I try to tell them, like, we were somewhere and there was a guy, obviously had been on drugs and he was panhandling on the street. And like my daughter was like, "What's wrong with him?" I'm like, "He's on drugs." And they're like, "What are drugs?" And we had a conversation about drugs. And this is what happens when you take drugs. And like that, and like people were like, "I can't believe you talked to your daughters about that." I'm like, why wouldn't I? If I don't talk to them, who's going to talk to them? Like, why are we at this point? We want to shelter our children from all of these fucking terrible things. And then all of a sudden the terrible things come to your door. And then you have to have this explanation. I don't want to have this talk when I'm 16. I want to have this conversation over the course of 10 years.
Yeah. And it's ironic, John, if you don't talk to them, they don't have situational awareness. In other words, words, good information actually supports the situational awareness that is that's the fuel for all action. Otherwise you're reactive. Otherwise you're always getting blindsided. And then look at, I had some really strange conversations with my kids. We know some of the crap that's being fed to them by the agendas of teachers and schools, parents. You look at anything going on, the violence in society. You look at look at the meltdowns that are happening now post-election.
Yeah. That's
shitty parenting. Like, at the end of the day, I remember reading years ago, I was a single dad. I'm happily married now with 2 kids, but, we got 3 kids together, and expose them to everything and talk to them about stuff. And they all, they were all had to come through the training, even if they didn't want it. And I remember years ago when I took custody of my son when he was born, I had fought for custody of him and had him, since day one, which was an amazing thing. And living in Canada at the time, unheard of, because it, probably similar in the States, it just automatically, defaults to the mom unless, she's, a drug addict, prostitute, or whatever. But
no, she has to be dead, actually.
She has to be. Wow.
Yeah, they'll do. Yeah.
So, what was interesting is I started, like, when this reality happened, I remember I had no fear. I just knew I had to learn this stuff. And I remember reading something about just about the parenting and about the kids stuff that you just reminded me. And one was, nothing affects a child's life more than a parent's unlived life, which kind of blew my mind and made me really think about my goals and what I had to do. Okay, I wasn't going to be this stay-at-home dad. I was going to take my kid on the road with me and travel all over. And the other thought was something, I'm going to screw it up, but paraphrasing it, that this therapist, famous psychologist, a therapist, wrote. He says, "I always want to meet the parents. It helps me forgive the children." And another, heavy thought, provocative, thing, where I look at what's going on out in the streets and the meltdowns, and I'm going like you can't blame Obama and the schools directly for that. Of course, there were some fucked up decisions made, with that, and there's a lot to blame there, in my opinion. But like you and I didn't start crying. We didn't go out and protest when he got, elected. And what I'm saying is, like, our self-esteem and our focus on what we had to do as good humans, as what we had to do as parents, what we had to do as businessmen, it didn't impact whether it was Republican or liberal or any of that shit. And so this comes back to when I see like a guy weeping because Donald Trump was, I go, that's fuck. That guy had no parents. That's it's just this line that.
Well, it's this weird thing, and you've seen it actually being a parent. Like we go to different play dates, and we have a bunch of friends that are our kids were in preschool with, and you go hang out with these other parents, and you realize people don't look at things the same way. And people, and Greg Glassman made one of the most insightful comments that Greg does make. I mean, and I think he just these things just come off the cuff for him. But he said people fail at the margins of their experience. And he said that, and it was one of those things where that was such an impactful statement to me. And it's so true. I mean, I've seen it everywhere. People fail at the margins of their experience. If they haven't pushed their experience level and, what their, desire to go out and understand, then that's where they stop. And there's so few people that want to go out and explore, even if it is dangerous, that maybe, don't want to ask the hard questions because they don't want to get the hard answers. And then they're fine to stop here. And then all of a sudden you get into raising children and you're trying to, teach them within your breath of life and offer them some of your experience. I mean, because that's all really parenting is. Like, this is what I did. These are the mistakes. These are the positives. This is what I've done. And now I have to be able to hopefully teach you, how, right from wrong, how to navigate this thing. Because, at the end of the day, like, I'm not going to be here forever. And the only thing that's going to stick with you is the lessons that I've taught you. I mean, it's like my dad is still, has taught me more about, life than I would ever care, and probably didn't even realize he was doing it. Like
Right.
the joke we talk at the seminar is, when I was like 13, all of a sudden I grew real fast and I couldn't run anymore and I was slow. And I went to my dad and I said to my mom, I was like, I'm not fast anymore. Like, I need somebody to teach me how to run. And my mom was like, oh, it's a good idea. And I asked my dad. My dad's like, I'm not fucking paying for that shit. And he kind of blew it off. And then I had to kind of go back. And I remember I was PE. I was going to get like a C or a D, and I was too embarrassed to come home with a low grade. So I asked the teacher if I could do makeup runs as extra credit. And the teacher was like, yeah, sure, whatever. I mean, whenever everybody asked. So we would run on a timed run on Wednesday. And then Friday after school, like towards the end of school, I would run again so I could get extra points. So I would get a passing grade because I didn't want to come home and actually show my parents I got a C in PE. And like if my dad
Right.
probably like put me in some running stuff and showed me where I was fucked up, it probably wouldn't have had to do it, but also it wouldn't have like taught me that, a little bit of self-reliance. And then to this day, I still bust his balls. I'm like, Dad, like you could have got me a running coach. He's like, dude, you played 10 years in the NFL. I'm like, I could have played 12, and like we joke about these things, but he's like, it seemed dumb to me at the time, but he goes, it ended up working out in the end. But it's, I think, children put a lot of shit in perspective, and until you have kids, like it's kind of one of those things where you really don't even put yourself in that mindset. But I mean, for my daughters, I mean, my son, I have no doubt that, because you will naturally put your boys in situations, I hope, that, put them in stressful situations and allow them to test themselves. I mean, that's what fucking men have done to their sons for an eternity. But I think your daughters, people are so, and you have daughters as well. People coddle their kids. I mean, they coddle their daughters. They treat them like these little princesses, and, we don't want anything bad to happen. And then they go to college and, all of a sudden you're not there to manage everything and they get themselves into trouble. And I'm not doing that with my kids. I don't want to ever not prepare the people. And that's something we do here at Power Athlete when we teach seminars or training. I look at my job is to prepare these people for what they're going to use it for. And there was what was the movie The Hunted with Benicio del Toro and Tommy Lee Jones?
Academy Award winner.
Dude, unbelievable movie. I mean, you want to talk about fear and a lot of those things, but he plays Tracker Tom Brown, and the lady asked him, how did you get good at this stuff? He said, my dad, went off to war and, people died, and he was going to make sure that his sons never died. So he taught us all this stuff. His dad looked at it like this idea that he had to prepare his sons for the worst that was going to happen. And then, they were able to develop this skill set. And I really think that's where parenting, at least from my perspective, is really takes over, that you have to prepare themselves, because if you don't, who's going to do them? Are you going to just be able to drop them off at the dojo? I mean, my dad, dropped us off there, and, thank God it took and did pretty well. But I mean, where are the people that, like if I drop my kid off at Tony Blauer's, I'm pretty sure they're going to understand, not only fear, but all these things, but how do they navigate this? Like, where do people learn this? And, that's been really, for us, and especially with Power Athlete, like developing a training system where, we are developing athleticism. That's what I believe. I believe I can make people better athletes. And if you're a better athlete, you can go to something like you're doing and be a better version of yourself. You can go do this. You can do all these things. And what I've really seen is when people fail is in their understanding of their own body and how to use it in space and all these other things. But they have to have the mental, training to be able to.
Yeah. And that's the whole thing is, for, I don't know when I first started saying this, but the mind navigates the body. When you get up and decide to go for a run, it's because something in your emotional, psychological system said, I'm going to run today, because most people don't want to go run. And so it's not your muscle memory. It's not your quads and your calves that are taking you for a run. It's your mindset. And everything, I believe, starts with the mind. And if you reverse engineer everything, it's kind of what I said earlier, but fear throttles everything we do, from who we talk to therefore who we marry, how much money we make, where you live, how much weight you lift, and whether or not you defend yourself is all going to be throttled by or supercharged by how you look at fear. And it's it's amazing to hear you say about your program, that it's about the evolution of the athlete and their movement and their confidence and their athleticism. And this is what we again, we try to be transcendent. And I'm using my two observations in life, I created a program I wish somebody had taught me as a kid, and it wasn't there. And so my boxing coach, taught me how to box But he didn't teach me how to think and manage fear. I had to figure that shit out, in and outside the ring. My Taekwondo instructor, he was like your Shotokan instructor, rigid and focused and purist and all that. But there never was, and even some of the most high tech performance psychologists of today, I look at the stuff and I yawn. It just makes me, I'm like, really? They're still telling you to visualize that you're talking to Cindy Crawford to calm down and like these like silly visualizations are going like when somebody's trying to punch you in the face or someone's got a gun in your face, or there's a whole different thing going on there, and so everything comes down to that mindset. And what we do, like in your course, is our transformative goal is greater self-awareness and understanding D1 from the inside. What are my fears? Because what I fear is also going to impact what I see and how I react to all of that. And we use the self-defense because at the end of the day, unless it's somebody like if you came to our course, John, you'd be looking at it as because of the stress inoculation you've had throughout your life and you're just the mindset, your worldview on violence, where a lot of people come to our course scared shitless, right? And there's that irony of fear at work. We had 2 women sign up for a 2-day course I was doing when I lived in Montreal, who literally got mugged on the way to my seminar. And I called them because it was only 12 people in the course. We were starting. I called their cell and said, "Hey, you're late. We need to start." And they said, "Start without us. We're not coming." I had a facility in an industrial park, and so they had to walk. Wasn't public transit, subway, bus stop type situation. But they actually got mugged on the way there. And I remember thinking, and this is what I'm talking about, like personalities. If I had signed up for a self-defense seminar and got mugged on the way there, after I lost my belongings, I would run to the seminar and go, "Fucking teach me. This was a day too late." Right? They went home and went, "Look, the world is a bad place. You can't do shit." And so it was a really interesting juxtaposition for me. But
did they come to the seminar, or they just didn't come?
No. They just bailed.
And you couldn't talk them into it, huh?
No, I didn't. Well, I didn't try at that point. It was like, okay, I'm starting, but it was just because at that moment, it was almost like we were saying earlier, that pressure reveals, like their DNA at that point. And at the end of the day, like to me, real violence is a choiceless choice, and I'm not cavalier about it. I tell people, listen, we're options facilitators. If you can do whatever you want. If you cooperate with a rapist, you get raped. You cooperate with a mugger, you get mugged. You've got to read the scenario and what's going on. So, but at the end of the day, nobody does anything without their ability to manage their fear. And the semantics of fear is interesting because I remember going down to Fort Bragg and got there a couple of days earlier. And one of the guys I met off site, and he said, "Hey, we're going jumping this weekend. Do you want to come?" And I'd already, skydived twice. I really don't like heights, and so I skydived twice as a part of my self analysis, fear management, mindset shit, because I really don't like heights. And so I said, I'm going to jump out of an airplane and do kind of this assessment on myself, my breathing, my blood pressure, and I did this way back in the day. So I knew I could jump out of an airplane if I had to. And over the years, I've met like 2 types of people who jump, and I'm talking about like, military dudes. And there are those who love jumping out of an airplane and those who hate jumping out of an airplane, but they both jump out of an airplane, right? One to stay qualified and one just extra time. They just love the skydiving aspect. And so this is really a story about the semantics of fear, because if I ask somebody, "Hey, are you afraid?" They're like, "No." And everyone's afraid of something, right? It's what you visualize when you give the answer is the stuff you're not afraid of, with the shit that's in your comfort zone. And so, I remember saying to this guy, "Hey," he goes, "You want to come jumping?" I go, "No." He goes, "Why are you afraid?" I said, "Well, I don't like jumping out of airplanes. I've done it. I'm not a big fan." And he smiled because he knew like, oh, I caught Tony being afraid of something. And I went, hey, listen, now we're all afraid. I said, you're not afraid? He goes, no. I said, so you have no fear jumping in an airplane? He goes, no. I go, so let me pack your chute. He's like, fuck that, right? And it was like, oh, so you are afraid if I pack your chute. Suddenly, the ritual changes. And so at a certain point, it becomes, semantics. And it's almost what you said with Greg's quote, and this whole, pushing the, like I love to use this maxim: you never know how much you can do until you try to do more than you can. And the way we understand, and again, that is like to actually say to yourself, I'm going to try and run harder, faster, or I'm going to do more push-ups, or I'm going to, try and do these tactical reloads faster and harder. I'm going to whatever it is you're doing. It's still about fear management. It's still about, can I do this? It's that Roger Bannister thing where everyone goes, no one will break the 4-minute mile. Then he does it, and then everyone does it. And now if you can't run 4 minutes, you can't compete, right? And so you remember when 135 pounds in CrossFit used to be like world-class weight, right? Now, like the average Joes are flinging that around, and it's that adaptation. But the adaptation starts. Well, here's another quote of Greg's. The greatest adaptation occurs between the years. I want to share one story that's amazing about individual rituals. Is I always, when I would meet somebody, whether they were military, law enforcement, fighter, victim of violence, I would always talk to them and try and get in their head a little bit. And I remember talking to Maurice Smith. I don't know if you know Maurice, but Maurice was a K1 world champion.
Sure.
So I got to know him a little bit years ago. And I remember before an event, he was like lying there with just headphones on, whatever the beats of the day was, right? The cool headphones. And he's just like listening to R&B type thing, just chilling. And around me, there was one fighter, sitting where his knee is like pounding, like, bouncing off the floor, like vibrating. Another guy punching his face, walking around. Another guy standing in front of a locker, banging his head on it. People pacing, people quiet. And I remember saying to Maurice, I go, hey, I study fear. You mind if I ask you a couple questions? He goes, yeah, sure, go ahead. And I go, so you seem like incredibly relaxed right now, like you're getting ready to go into a fight. So do you feel fear? Talk to me about that. And he goes, let me ask you a question. I say, sure, go ahead. He says, do you have a job? I go, yes, I do. He said, are you afraid to go to work? I go, no, I'm not. He says, me either. Right? And it was just, he had evolved to the point where this is how I feed my family. This is my job. Now, everyone goes, well, what a cool line for a movie. But what I share to people is, listen, if I had said to that fighter who was punching himself in the face, pacing the room, or that other fighter who was sitting on the bench and his foot was going a million miles an hour just with adrenaline, if I had said, I need you to put on these headphones and listen to smooth jazz, he might have lost his fight. Everyone, this is where I come back to that self-awareness piece. You need to find out what's productive and what's destructive to your goal. And I was teaching in Singapore this past weekend, and I said, there's stuff that I'm realizing now in my 50s, at 56, that I wish somebody had shared with me when I was 26. But wait a minute, I would have had to have been born at -4 for that to make any sense, because it took me 30 years to realize like that was right. And so shit just takes time. As long as, if you're a good human and you're focused on good shit, and you're just trying to do the right thing, I think things turn out. We have no choice but to think that way. They turn out okay. And a lot of it starts with, what you spoke of a lot of, and that's just being honest with your kids and giving them the tools to navigate the bullshit in life. Because all the other shit it's literally part of the narrative, right? It's just part of you have to get a job and you got to pay this and you got to do that and all that. The rest of the shit is like our goals towards our personal happiness are just about that authenticity. This got kind of heavy for a moment.
No, it's great. I mean, fear is interesting because, I got to see all levels of fear playing in the NFL. And there were guys that were, fearful of losing, guys fear of winning. I mean, fear of this, and like fear is kind of one of those deciding factors. And I played with guys that, could sleep before the game and had, zero fear about anything. And I actually had this, I very early assessed my fear, which was a fear of losing. And I fucking hate losing, and I don't ever want to lose. And so I had this weird fear of losing that actually drove me to get up in the morning and train and to do all the little things, because I knew if I put all those little things in place, that it mitigated my fear of losing on game. Because you go out there and your name's on the back of your jersey, and everybody sees that. At least for me, Wellborn, and everybody I ever went to fucking school with that thought I wasn't going to do it or could do it or whatever it is. All those people are watching, and I know what's in their mind is they're waiting for me to fuck up to be like I knew it. And that weird little piece of being like, I'm never going to ever, have anybody, ever assume anything other than the truth, which is the fact that I went out there and played the game exactly as I should have, which was, hard, and, did exactly what I needed to do and wanted to be successful. And I had this a weird fear of failure, and to the point where it was hard for me to almost live in the moment for the game. Like people think of the joys and all this. I mean, I actually, like when the game was done and I knew I did my work, okay, let's get to the next one. And people always ask, did you really love the game? And for me, it was like, I didn't really give a shit about the game. I only cared about the individual combats, the one-on-one fights, and, being able to prove myself good or bad on every single one. And they were like, well, did you do it for the love? I'm like, no, I did it because I didn't like to lose.
Right.
I did it for the, and they were like, well, was that why you got betrayed? I'm like, no, I was fucking scared if I didn't, I'd get my ass kicked. So that's why you get up in the morning, and that's why you train, and that's why you do all these things to prepare yourself so that you can go out and be, the weapon of violence you need yourself to be. And then you have to have enough fucking wherewithals to be like, I have enough pride and enough fear to not want to ever fucking lose. And like that mindset, like when you start talking to people are like, no, I don't have that mindset at all. And I'm like, well, that's the one that just worked for me. It might not work for you. And when the young guy talked to me about it, because when you come in the NFL and you've been there for a while, the young guys always ask you questions like, oh, this and this. And when I'd explain that thing to them, like I'd see this kind of blank look, and they kind of get a little disheveled, being like, well, I don't have that. And I'm like, well, dude, you might have something else. You just have to find what drives you, and being able to manage your fear. Because I watched guys, like you said, that were amazing practice players. All of a sudden you put them in 100,000 people screaming all these stressful situations, and they would fucking melt down. And I remember thinking, like, how is it that, like how are you letting all this external information come through and, force you out what you need to do? Like, to me, that was weird. I'm like, just calm the noise. Don't hear it. Don't focus on what you have to do. And that was, it was interesting, but I mean, maybe that's the reason that, guys like Tom Brady can, rise to the occasion when it's the most stressful situation, but yet, you have a million other guys you've never heard of that were amazing practice players. Why is it that, and people use it all the time, like this guy was, this guy's a gamer, or, guys in fight prep, like maybe not a great training camp, but yet are able to go out and, be amazing fighters. And, so it's something I always thought about. Like,
yeah, that's, it's funny while you're telling that story about what motivated you and drove you is, I kept waiting for an opportunity to say, hey, you should thank your father for not getting you that running coach, because, and here's the thing is what he did is he triggered self-reliance and initiative in you. And you don't know at what point were you predisposed to that, and you'd have been successful, like the joke you made, hey, you'd have played 12 years instead of 10 years. But, I've tried to, trigger self-reliance and initiative in employees and friends and family, and it doesn't work. In other words, at some point, I got to the point where now I'm at a point where I go, I'm going to show you the way. I explain some shit. I'm going to try and motivate you a couple of times, but this is going to be like baseball, 3 strikes and you're out. And then I still love you and I'm still friends with you, but I'm not going to try and figure out how to motivate you, because I've got to keep my shit together. And it's interesting, just how lazy people are, but we're from different generations. But I also think that I think there's a genetic element to this, that not everyone's going to, play in the NFL. Not everyone's going to be a fighter. At the end of the day, I really believe from a physiological point of view and from just like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, just that foundational survival thing, that if we understood fear, and this is like the big paradigm shift that we try to invoke is, you remember the No Fear company,
Sure.
NO Fear. And so I remember, I bought all the t-shirts because I lived with so much fear as an athlete in life, learning, trying to study violence, following that same path. And I remember buying the shirts, and the joke I make in our seminars now is I bought those shirts, but they were all fucking defective because I would wear the No Fear shirt and I was still like scared,
The irony of that is my buddy Rick actually was their original designer and did all the No Fear designs. And like all that
was great.
Yeah,
it was great stuff. But I tell people like, hey, listen, the belief that a state of no fear exists perpetuates more fear, because if you get outside that comfort zone, that margin of experience, you will get an adrenaline dump. And that's just not understanding physiology. And if you understand how to look at that adrenaline dump, you can use it as a fuel, or it'll fuck you up. And it'll get in your head. And now you got this unsolicited fear. And it's just it's your imagination, manipulating what you should be thinking about right now and what you need to do. One of the things, it was funny, we talked about the psychology of intimidation from a fighter's perspective. We'll ask everyone in a course, and I've worked with pro fighters and stuff, and I go, hey, have you ever been intimidated? And everyone talks that game like, no, he's going down, I'm going to kick his ass. And I remember, saying, have any of you ever been intimidated? And they're like, yeah. I go, so here's what in the psychology of intimidation is when you're visualizing what your opponent can do to you instead of what you must do to your opponent. And it's this like reframe where a lot of people for a moment slip in, whether it's thinking about a back kick or thinking about a tackle or thinking about a gunfight. It's like, what if this happens? And, we created this whole, what we call the neural circuitry of fear, kind of a flow chart of how your brain takes a stimulus and how it goes through all these silly little, they're not silly, it goes through all these little stages, which are fixation points. And they slow that whole process down. How do I make a decision? How do I get, to action, as soon as possible? But we still need to, at the end of the day, for people who are listening intently, if there's like a thread through here, the thread through here is, if you feel any type of fear about something, you've got to look more carefully at it. Don't shirk from it. Don't step away from it. And then what it'll lead to is greater self-awareness, which will lead you to greater self-actualization, which will lead you to decide whether you're actually cut out to be a football player or a fighter or a lover or an artist or whatever. At the end of the day, what do we want? We just want to be fucking happy. But I believe this, and it was we had a guy that came into my school back in the 80s, and he signed up for a 3-month membership, and he trained every single day. I knew him. He worked at a restaurant. He was a university kid, worked at this restaurant that I used to frequent, and found out what I did. He said, man, I always want to learn how to fight. I said, come in. And he signed up, and I thought he was going to be a prodigy. I mean, this guy who trained his ass off, like one of those guys that you're going, holy shit. And so I poured a lot of energy into him, which he, like a sponge, took, and he trained, and he would always come in early, he'd stay late. I'm going, this guy's going to be a future instructor for sure. Definitely going to recruit him. And so his membership ends, and he just stops coming. And I see him, like a week goes by, and I'm like, what the fuck? And I see him